welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi. My name is Matt.
And my name is James.
And this week on the show, we're returning once again to overpopulated dystopias and the population control measures that they are enacting. But this week, the two films that we're looking at contain great escapes from our dystopias.
Dun, dun, dun.
A couple of rollicking, uplifting rides, getting free from these societies. I'm sure they're going to be very, very cheery, right? What are the two films we've got for that, James?
Yes, very cheery subject matter once again on the podcast. The films we are looking at this week are Z.P.G, or Zero Population Growth from 1972, and THX 1138, directed by George Lucas from 1971. So yeah, two films, both using letters, abbreviations, what have you, in their titles. That isn't the only reason we paired them. There's other stuff, as we've already talked about. But yeah, I'm looking forward to going into yet another dystopian world. And hopefully we will get an escape and it'll be a happy ending. But let's wait and find out.
Yeah, look, I don't know if it's going to be nice, but we are going to get out. So
at least there's that.
Yeah. Shall we get started with Z.P.G, Zero Population Growth?
Yes, let's delve into this one.
As of today, childbearing is herewith forbidden.
Oliver Reed and Geraldine Chaplin in a new film about a most frightening future.
Mummy, you're my mummy.
Doctor, I want to have a baby.
That's impossible, Carol.
I know, but I want my own baby.
You know that's impossible, Carol. No one is allowed to have a baby for the next 22 years.
Z.P.G is a motion picture that shows what can happen.
What do you think you're doing? One word from me and you and her and the baby have had it.
Baby! This could happen to you any day now. Any day now. Z.P.G. Z.P.G. Rated PG.
So I'd never heard of this film before we started planning for this series, and I'm quite surprised by that because it's Oliver Reed doing a 70s sci-fi film. It's that's such a good sell, isn't it? Like that's it sounds great.
Yeah.
And it's got that kind of like 70s sci-fi feel all over it, hasn't it? So I'm really glad we found it, and I'm really glad we're doing it.
Yeah, I think there was a whole batch of, like we've been looking at throughout the series, there's a whole batch of dystopian films which came out around the 70s, but I think there was such an influx of sort of sci-fi films as well. Not all of the studios could back them with promotion and things. So this one, I think, flew under the radar for a lot of people. And I mean, like we said, we didn't really know much about it until we started doing the research for this particular series. But yeah, it's a really interesting one, and it fits in well following the two films we looked at last week, Soylent Green and What Happened to Monday, both of which dealt with overpopulation. And that is the main theme of this. I mean, the film's called Zero Population Growth. They're trying to find a fix for the growing population and the resources which they just don't have to sort of feed and look after this population. And also just the way that the world's fallen into disrepute. It's in the middle of an ecological disaster, this film, isn't it, basically?
Yeah, and they've rejected any halfway measures, they say, to control the out-of-control population situation. And I couldn't help but feel that Soylent Green and What Happened to Monday that we looked at last time on the show, they would be examples of halfway measures. Soylent Green, we can't do anything about overpopulation, but we can use the overpopulation itself as a food resource. And What Happened to Monday said, well, we need to stop having kids, but we won't stop you having kids. You can have one kid. I think those are halfway measures in the world government's view of Z.P.G. So they've enacted the edict. I love the language in this film. The edict, before edict, after edict. And the edict is zero population growth. No one can have a child for 30 years, punishable by death.
Yeah, 30 years. And I mean, it's really weird, this idea as well, because 30 years is such a specific time. So they've obviously got all their data. They're ready with their graphs. They sort of know how much of they're curving the population growth, aren't they, by doing this? So it's very interesting how specific it is. So yeah, that was the first thing that struck me.
30 years is, I guess, roughly what you would call one generation, right? Like boomers to to Gen X. There's probably something in between there that I'm missing, and so on. Those generations, it's roughly a third. It's always very hard to exactly categorize perfectly, I think, although I'm sure you can look it up and there will be years, but it's roughly 30 years, I think. So they're cutting a generation just out of the mix. But then, you know, who's going to have kids? I guess it's the people who were children when the edict was enacted. They're the ones who are going to have to repopulate, or not repopulate, but continue the human race after 30 years.
Yeah. And I mean, this was a real problem that people were thinking about at this time in the 70s. And I think this particular film was loosely based on some ideas in this non-fiction book, which came out in 1968, a book called The Population Bomb by Paul R. Ehrlich, I think that's how you pronounce his name, which basically predicted this worldwide famine which would happen in the 70s and 80s due to overpopulation. So people were really worried about this actually happening because of a population explosion, which I think happened in the 50s and 60s. They were having more kids, and then suddenly people were like, okay, this could become a problem in the future. That's another sort of interesting aspect to this.
We're a small group animal trying to live in gigantic groups, wrecking our life support systems, and we have not come to grips with how to do something about it. The saddest thing is that the scientific community has been all over the place announcing that we're on the edge of going under and we're in the process. Right now, around the world, nothing, and I repeat, nothing significant is being done about it. All the little success stories you hear are tiny little things compared to the scale of the problem. One of the biggest tasks is to re-engineer the entire energy system of the planet. That's no trivial task.
Yeah, and it's still a concern today, hence films like What Happened to Monday that we looked at last week, a very recent film about pretty much the same topic.
Yeah, and equally, underpopulation, I think, is something which we'll come across later in this series, because there's also lots of sci-fi films where what happens if you can't have kids and sort of what are the repercussions of that. But in this one, they can't have kids because they're just not allowed. It's against the law. You'll be put into a giant bubble and suffocated if you have kids. So don't do it.
But the population aren't responding very well to that, are they? That's kind of the whole plot of the movie, but it was interesting that you see the dystopian aspects of society that are in place to curb those instincts before you're introduced to characters experiencing those instincts. Do you know what I mean? One of the first scenes we see is, what's it called? Babyland.
Babyland, yeah.
Yeah.
Babyland is the weirdest thing, and it's such a striking sort of scene to go straight into in this film. And it's basically where the people which can't have kids, which would quite like to have kids and are missing that aspect of life, go to pick up this robot child, which is the most terrifying doll you could ever imagine, which will talk to you and you look after. It'll get sick. It'll go through all of the stuff which a real child would go through, except it won't grow old. It'll just be this weird robotic baby. I mean, it's creepy.
Yeah, they are creepy, but I was watching it wondering what you were going to make of it, because I know you hate creepy kids in films, and I was wondering where you stood on creepy robot kids.
I mean, creepy robot kids are just as bad. I mean, ghost children are the worst. Yeah. I mean, without a doubt. I don't know what it is. They're freaky.
These robots were weird, though. They were very Doctor Who, weren't they?
Yeah, like original Doctor Who kind of vibes, yeah.
If anyone's listening and hasn't seen it, imagine a baby Auton from Doctor Who, and that's what these things look like. Sort of waddling around, the way they walked was really creepy. It was just so slow, that first child that we're introduced to, when it's pushing the little stroller and it's just walking so slowly to the characters. It did freak me out a lot.
And there's such
Mummy!
Oh, terrible. And there's such a massive queue as well of people waiting to get these kids, these robot kids. It's our main characters, who are played by Oliver Reed and Geraldine Chaplin, the characters of Russ and Carol, who are the couple that we follow throughout the film. And they're in this queue, and then they can't bring themselves to do this. Carol has a proper sort of freak out moment in this queue, and that kind of sets up her trajectory in the film. What her character arc is going to be like. She's going to want to have her own child. But it was just this sort of panic. You can see the emotions which these people are dealing with as well. And it's kind of like the impact of not having kids, like having no children around, no real children around for 30 years. It's really affected this population, hasn't it?
Yeah, they've all gone a little bit mad, and you get some great scenes where people are breaking the rules, and I think they all happen outside, don't they? And I also think it was the same character each time. There's like a hysterical woman who is, so if someone has had a child illegally, you can grass them up and you will get a reward from the state. You'll get extra like food credits because food is very tightly rationed.
Get your Soylent Green.
Exactly, yeah. They would run out into the streets and like just scream, baby, baby, baby. But I think it was the same woman like that we saw 3 times in the film, right?
Yeah, I don't know, because Edna, who we see later on, who is one of Carol and Russ's colleagues at the museum, colleagues/lovers/ who knows what they're doing.
Yeah. There's a blonde woman, though, that I'm sure we see once or twice in the first half of the film that's just out there trying to grass people up for crimes. Because she gets it wrong at first, and then she gets it right later. She accuses a young boy of being illegal, but he's got the before edict stamp on his forehead, and then she correctly calls out a woman with a baby.
Yeah, it's like a barcode kind of stamp, isn't it? Or like an invisible barcode on these babies' heads that they have.
Yeah, you have to be stamped to be legal. But what I loved about those scenes is that it always takes place outside, this calling out and public shaming of criminals. But the outside in this film is such a weird place. Like, it's all obviously shot on, I think everything's done on a set. There's no like location shooting, maybe at the very end.
Because it's Danish American, isn't it? So it's shot over there.
Yeah, right, okay. Oh, well, they didn't make much of the Danish geography,
it's just,
I wouldn't say.
Just smog and face masks.
But point being, that works really well, doesn't it? Because it's so horribly claustrophobic in the outside scenes. Like you cannot see, characters can't see like a meter in front of them because the smog is just like a thick smoke machine smoke completely enveloping everything. So you potentially could sneak your illegal child out for a walk in your stroller because, you know, someone's not going to see you from across the street unless they come over.
Yeah, and there's something, again, the sort of creepy nature of it, because like fog's scary as it is, but it's these voices shouting baby out of the fog.
You got another one. Come quick. They found another one.
It's so freaky. It's got this sort of terrifying atmosphere around it, all of these scenes, and it really aids the dystopia itself and sort of the eeriness of it all. I mean, there's so many things which are creepy. We talked about the robot children, but also the fact that they've got like brainwashing happening as well, and like this sort of like these weird scenes where they're suddenly being interrogated. Like there's one scene where Russ is looking up stuff about like how to deal with premature birth and what best to do, and he's trying to disguise it by looking through different archive stuff, but then he gets flipped round into this like room, and all these people are like interrogating him, like, what were you looking at? And there's mirrors everywhere, so it's kind of got that big brother element to it as well, hasn't it?
There was definitely shades of 1984 there. I thought it was a very high-tech 1984, because 1984 has a lot of futuristic technology, but the aesthetic is crumbling away derelict buildings and stuff like that. Like, that's what 1984 looks like. But Z.P.G takes the similar kind of all-seeing surveillance and the ability of the state to just like sweep you into a room and interrogate you and torture you, but gives it this very futuristic sheen. That scene where he goes into that room, it's like, you know, the walls kind of fold away and then his chair scoots forward and then he's pinned down by some psychological force. You know, the interrogation kind of happens without any physical restraints, I think, doesn't it? So it was a very kind of futuristic, but a similar way of controlling the population to 1984. I did kind of think in that scene, like, why do they even have the premature birth information available? Is it just there to trap people so you can torture them and see if they're planning a home birth?
Yeah, it's weird because all of their records are sort of out in the open, aren't they? And I mean, with the other dystopian films we've looked at, a sort of prime trait of a dystopian film or any piece of genre is that they try and erase the past as well, or manipulate the past. Whereas in this, it seems like everything's just on display. Like the fact that Russ and Carol work in the museum and are actually like part of an exhibit as well, it's so weird because they show the 20th century. They've got an entire museum depicting all of the things that happen in the 20th century. You've got like different animals, like stuffed animals. They've got like cats and rabbits and things like that. But then they've got other things which just like everyday things that they would have had in the 70s anyway. And you know what it made me think of? There's the Science Museum in London. And they've got bits like this where they've got stuff from the 70s and it's like all the old technology and it's in a museum. But it's like in this is sort of like it's the past. But then it's weird the sort of the parallels between that and actually what museums are like now.
Mm. Yeah, well, it is like a real museum, isn't it? Except they don't have like a reenactment of a swingers party at the Science Museum, sadly, you know.
Yeah.
But what was interesting about that was like it was a real treat, wasn't it, for the characters to go to that museum. There was another huge queue. I think someone says there was a 4-year waiting list or something like that to get in. Yeah. But it's this, you know, it's a museum of just cataloguing the ecological and social disaster that the world has gone through. But it's the only place where you can see like stuffed animals that no longer exist in the real world. So that it's this weird balance of just an insanely depressing museum, but also a real treat for the characters.
And I mean, going back to the swingers scene, which you were talking about, that really took me aback because you're sort of plonked into this scene after Russ and Carol have been looking around the museum, and then it looks like they're just at home, but then they're not at home. They're actually acting out this like swingers scenario, and then all of a sudden you see all of these people clapping after they've like said their last line, and it's so weird. It's really
I absolutely just thought Russ and Carol were swingers in their home life, and like my first thought was, oh yeah, here we go, early 70s sci-fi movie, the future's going to be swinging. Like
I was like, it's a bit Brave New World, isn't it, with all the sort of those kind of relationships. And I thought that might be, maybe that's the knock-on effect of not having children. Like sex is no longer something to make babies. They're not viewing it in that way, at least for 30 years.
Yeah, I guess so. But what actually is happening in the film is that relationships have basically just maintained a fairly standard monogamous course, and married life isn't that different, except what we're seeing in Russ and Carol, particularly Carol, not so much Russ, is that family unit that you form as a pair leads to this empty feeling, and a feeling that something is inherently missing, hence the creepy robot children, and hence Carol's decision to ultimately allow herself to get pregnant and continue with her pregnancy.
Yeah, and I mean the moment where she decides that is really like interesting as well, because it's after they've just had sex, and she goes to the toilet and there's an abortion machine in the bathroom. It's like that's just something they all have in their houses to try and regulate this law and keep people from having kids. It's got to be so sort of like, this is what you do straight afterwards. Everything has to be sort of clinical as well. And again, that's kind of like the government, again, taking that sort of like, I don't know how to put it. They're putting even more restrictions on people's lives.
They're putting restrictions on people's lives, but the onus is on the population to abide by it. And they explicitly say at the start of the film that they're not going to do mass sterilization. That's one of the halfway measures that they've rejected. But what that means is they're putting the responsibility on you. Everyone's still, if you were biologically able to get pregnant, you still are. We haven't done anything to you. You've just got to sort yourself out. If you get pregnant, you need to get an abortion. Everybody needs to do that. And if you don't do it, we will kill you. It's punishable by death. Like, it's interesting that they put all of that onto the population. But I suppose they were doing that in What Happened to Monday as well, weren't they? It was your responsibility to not have more than one child, otherwise the squads come in and take them away.
What is all this?
Library Security Chief, Department of State Security. I'm going to ask you some questions.
It's not necessary.
Why are you interested in premature births?
It was a mistake. I must have touched up the wrong number.
Just what subject were you looking for?
Because they've still got this sort of preservation of the old ways, haven't they, with like the museums and things like that. And also the restaurants I found really interesting, because they go to a restaurant and they're just having paste, but then the restaurant sort of like has all of these things that they could order, like steak and something like that, and they make a comment like it would just taste exactly the same.
Yeah, they all taste the same as each other, like they haven't even perfected mushy paste that replicates the various flavours on offer. It's yeah, it's so grim. Again, reminiscent of Soylent Green. I think it's quite a good dystopian trope. It's one that I like because I'm a big foodie. So showing societies where those are your options, like the gruel in the Matrix compared to the steak that Cypher eats, stuff like that. It's very powerful and evocative for me. It makes me side with Cypher in that scene when he's eating the steak. Even though I'm a veggie, I don't, but that'd be perfect for me because it's not real steak.
Yeah. And like in 1984 when they're drinking, what are they drinking? Is it gin?
Yeah, Victory Gin, which is basically just like paint stripper.
So just drinking paint stripper and then having a bit of like gruel. That's like, yeah, it seems like that kind of thing. Food becomes less of a luxury in these dystopias. It's more of just a necessity. So they're sort of having to make things as simple as possible.
But again, we have a fresh vegetables moment in Z.P.G where I think Russ brings the fresh vegetables to like a party, and it just descends into an absolute frenzy when people catch sight of it.
Yeah, why has he just left it out in the open?
I know,
like he's got like a cauliflower or something. Everybody's going crazy for the cauliflower.
Isn't it a gift for the hosts?
Oh, yeah, because they've got their own little vegetable patch or something, don't they? Because they're quite well off.
They're very privileged, yeah. And she even... because Carol's acknowledging that when she's talking to her Big Brother screen psychiatrist, that she knows she has a good life relative to most of the people in this film, but she can't escape this void that she's feeling, lacking a family.
Yeah. It's interesting because, like, I kind of want to hear from the other sort of side of things about this sort of like, because we're showing Russ and Carol who really want to have a child. Well, Carol is sort of like bang on it the whole time. She's like, I want a baby. But you never see from like a couple which are just quite happy in how they are, because loads of people don't have kids and don't feel the desire to have kids. So if you're living in a world where that's the norm, then surely you'd fit in and that would be it. But that you never sort of see that other side of the coin, do you? Because even George and Edna, like, they go crazy as soon as they see the baby later on. And that sort of like, it affects them mentally. So I don't know if it's something like, maybe it's just not having kids anywhere, not even seeing children kind of has an effect on people.
I think I agree that would have helped with the world building a little bit and just to flesh out the world, because it's quite a short film. Hey, like, it's right on the money for the length of a film I want it to be, but you could throw in a scene or two like that to show that. The problem there is you couldn't focus too much on characters like that, because for those characters there's no real drama, there's no real tension, there's no real story. Like, yeah, they're living in a society that they are more well equipped to handle. They're not suffering from the psychological impact of the dystopia that couples who do want a family would be suffering from. So really, there's no dramatic tension, or there's less dramatic tension for those characters. But I do think it would round out the world a little bit to show people like that.
Yeah, it's interesting because it is so sort of focused in on that. I mean, that's the whole crux of the film, isn't it? This sort of like how having to have a secret baby. And again, you've got sort of like the secret aspect of hiding from the government, hiding from Big Brother. Like they build a little bedroom for Carol in the basement, and it's absolutely grotty. She's just like hiding there in the cold. She calls it like the Antarctic or Arctic or something like that.
Siberia,
that's it. Yeah. And she's like, oh, I'm going to go back down to Siberia. And yeah, it's just this sort of like keeping things secret and having to hide them away is such a dystopian thing as well. And like it was frustrating watching the birthing scene because the whole time she's trying to be quiet, yet she's doing the one thing which she has to make so much noise because the pain she's dealing with, like childbirth, it's one of those things where I'm like, I'm glad that I don't ever have to go through it, but I have so much respect for women being able to do that. And just that scene, it's got so much power to it.
And also the additional kind of impact of that scene where Russ gets interrogated in the library. That he's gone to the library to try and subtly research a premature birth and a home, find out about how to do a home birth and all of that. Like that scene is so fraught with risk, as unexpected home birth scenes in films usually are. But Russ can't even like Google. They have Google, which is this library they can go to and find out any information they want for free. As you said, all information is free. But it's like the one thing he's not allowed to Google is anything about birthing, because that's dangerous knowledge in this society. So they're facing this moment, without any medical support, and also without even being able to look up the basics of information about how to deal with this situation at home. It's quite scary.
Yeah, I mean, you'd be bang on Google, wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
Like, how the hell do I do? How do I hide a child from everyone, from the government? How do I? Holding
up my phone and watching a YouTube tutorial of how to give birth at home, like holding it in front of my wife, like just like this, darling, like. Do what she's doing in the video, you see?
Just get some warm towels. That's it, isn't it? Wet towels or something. You put those about.
Let me just skip forward in the video because he's just talking about himself and his channel and subscribing, and we'll get to the birth soon.
This is going to be our spin-off podcast where we teach people how to deliver a baby based on YouTube tutorials. No, I don't think that's a winner somehow.
Hey Google, how do you deliver a baby?
On the website verywellhealth.com, they say, put your hand in front of the baby's head and let it come out nice and slow. Don't try to hold the baby back, but don't let it explode from the vagina either. The baby will slide out slowly in waves as mom's uterus contracts. As the baby comes out, it will turn to the side naturally. To find out more, look for the link in your Google Home or Google Assistant app.
Wow.
So yeah, that's the dramatic crux of the film, isn't it? That Carol feels that she can't live without having a child. It's really important to her to be a mother. And I don't know how much the biological aspect of it, but certainly the mother of a real baby, not the mother of a creepy robo doll. So she breaks the law. They go into the fallout shelter. I was a bit vague on their long-term plan because the problem is that you can't just let the child grow up, because at any age, it's been 8 years since the edict. So, when this child is 5, 10, 20, they are always going to look far too young to be a legal citizen. What is the long-term plan for Russ and Carol? The kid has to live in that fallout shelter forever?
Yeah, they've just got there's no forward planning, is there, with this birth at all? Yeah. I mean, it's really mad. I mean, the maddest thing I found was when Carol is taking the baby to the doctor, and she's just like, right, I've just got to take him to the doctor. So she's just going out there with this baby in the pram. Anybody could come around and see, and that's kind of what happens. And the baby's crying, and it's just so sort of like, at any minute she could get caught. And then she gets right to the home or whatever with this old doctor is being kept, and then she shows him the baby, and it's like, he could take that the wrong way. He could be like, oh, well, this is a real baby, we've got to get rid of it.
Yeah, well, luckily she's sort of mates with him, and he's extremely depressed about the fact there are no babies.
But it's like, even the staff member who's with him.
Yeah.
She's just like, oh, that's fine. We'll just turn the lights down and hope the next door don't pop their heads through.
Yeah, it's It's like a slapdash little adventure they go on where they haven't really thought through this incredibly dangerous and complicated biological task that they want to achieve. So it's all a bit crazy. But, you know, they for a while, they get away with it and things seem to be going okay. But then the film took a real left turn, something I just wasn't expecting in the plot. What did you think about the kind of final act of the film and where George and Edna, their mates, get involved in the baby situation?
Yeah, it's really strange because suddenly they're sort of like taking control of the baby as well, George and Edna, this other couple who don't have any relationship to them really other than their sort of work colleagues and their like friends. I think it's just their reactions to the baby and just how they sort of take ownership and they think, oh, we should be the parents, we should have this baby. They sort of get really possessive as well, which is just sort of, I don't know, it shows how sort of emotionally unstable all of these people are in this dystopia. The fact that they take such a left turn in terms of their personalities and just become so obsessed that they want to be around the baby all the time. They're there all the time. They say, oh, we can look after the baby today. Like they go too into it. They get too excited.
Yeah, it's I liked this left turn that it took. It was a very Danny Boyle thing to do, I thought, you know, where something, I love Danny Boyle's films and something he does so well. Something Danny Boyle always does is that the tension just like goes up on this perfect upward curve in his films. They get to it a bit late in Z.P.G, but it's that same rapid trajectory of tension in the second half of the film, and particularly with the mistrust building between George and Edna and Russ and Carol. It's obvious that George and Edna are carrying some of the same difficulties about not being able to have a family as Carol is. It starts off very sympathetic, doesn't it? Like, you know, we understand, we won't tell anyone, and we'll help you if you want. And then it very, very quickly escalates from that to some quite soft blackmail, implied blackmail, to very explicit, cruel and overbearing blackmail by the end of the film.
Yeah. And I mean, Russ makes a good point. He says, like, well, if you want to have a baby, then why don't you have the same risk and do it yourselves as well? And
well, George makes a good point back. He says it's illegal. he's got him hook, line and sinker with that. He's like, I'm not going to do that because it's illegal and you've broken the law, not me.
So I'm just going to look after your baby because it's easier.
Yeah, it's quite a horrible scene. It's quite a horrible moment, isn't it? Where George and Edna finally just completely take the baby and just say they give up all pretense and they're just like, we're actually going to take the baby permanently now and there's nothing you can do about it because you'll get killed if you do.
And then they end up calling him in, don't they, at the end of it?
Yeah, it's a really, really nasty breakdown of any kind of friendship they had. Russ and Carol get put in one of those execution domes. I love the execution domes. So if you're caught breaking the law, basically a drone flies in, places a dome over you, and then what do you just like suffocate inside the dome?
It's just suffocation, isn't it? It's not really properly explained, but then they like spray paint it or something so no one can look inside as well.
Yeah, you're just left in this, like, it's like an airtight dome, and yeah, I think you just slowly suffocate, which again, it's just like, it's a great dystopian trope to have this cruel edict in place, but then the actual kind of delivery of the punishment and enforcement of it is unnecessarily cruel and violent. Like, you don't just die, you're going to slowly run out of air and suffocate in a dome, and then we get rid of you.
It's horrendous, isn't it? But then Russ and Carol have their sort of plan, don't they? They're gonna dig their way out of this dome. They figured out if they get put in one of the execution places, they know sort of certain spots, and they work it out somehow.
I think I think they've got allocated zones where those execution domes drop, and they just worked out which one was like the closest to their house, I think, which is, you know, it's a cool little thing, but like, how do you know you're going to get executed at the nearest one to your house? It's like, if you're taking the baby over to see the doctor at the museum, like, you know.
Yeah, it's all a bit mad, isn't it? And I mean, it just gets more and more mad because this, like we said, it's a great escape at the end of this. You've got them escaping with the baby, and this whole section at the end, I was sort of like, are they actually going to make it? can they get out of this sort of the city? And so they dig their way out, and then they find they go through the sewers, and they've got a little boat, haven't they? And they're just sort of paddling along. But then all the while, you've got George chasing them. He's figuring it out and he's trying to sort of get there. And I would just spend the whole time going like, oh, George is going to find them and then they're going to be fucked. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah, I wasn't confident of the Great Escape at the end of this film. But again, it's one of those dystopian endings where they get out into the ocean and then climb out onto a beach. But it's just a bit like, where to next? What's the plan, guys?
Yeah, and the beach says like warning radioactive materials and stuff. There's you can see like missile tributes or something. It looks like the Planet of the Apes, doesn't it?
Yes, very Planet of the Apes ending.
Yeah, they've reached the forbidden zone, haven't they? And they're sort of like they're going out into the forbidden zone, and then they're thinking they're going to find some island where there's no smog and it's clear or something like that, I think. But again, it's like, where are they going to find this special place where they can just live happily and not have to worry about anything? I mean, it seems like a pipe dream. But it's one of those ones, again, where you don't know how they're going to make their way out and if they're going to make it. And I think you watch the end of the film and you can carry the hope with you that they're going to have like a better life than the one that was available for them where they were. But you just don't know, do you? And it's like, given what the world is like, you could be very pessimistic about it, can't you?
You definitely can. I think it's a great dystopian ending because it's to be celebrated that the characters are kind of sticking it to the man. Like, you didn't kill us in the suffocation dome and we got out of the city. I don't think they have much of a hope, really. Like, their future doesn't seem bright to me. But you got away from the dystopian society and you beat the system to an extent, and there's hope in that kind of an ending.
Yeah, I think it's the beating the system thing, isn't it? Because
definitely
they've done what they wanted to do, and they've got out, and then the rest is up to them.
So shall we move on to our next film about a potentially hopeful great escape, beating the system, potentially depressing ending? Shall we move on to THX 1138?
Yeah, let's do it. So Matt, before we get on to THX 1138, the subject that we're looking at this week, we're looking at the theme of great escapes. Now, I know somewhere where you can find some extra great escapes, and that would be our Patreon site. Am I right?
Yeah, if you want to escape from the misery of the Dystopia series and just listen to something a bit more cheery, head over to our Patreon at patreon.com/journeythroughsci-fi, where we've got a whole back catalogue of stuff that you can sink your ear teeth into and listen to our bonus episodes there. You can join for £4 a month to get those bonus episodes, or you can join for £2 a month if you just want to support the show without listen to our bonus waffle.
Yes. So yeah, feel free to sink your ear teeth round all of that extra content. Anyway, back on with the show.
All Earth Council, in its infinite wisdom, has decided these two numbers are to be disposed of. The Biochemical Forum has demands to make on their parts, however, before they are eliminated. That's the kind of efficiency that makes you proud to live in this era.
Series compared to 38.
You're overrunning again. And just back off, THX 1138.
You have asked, are we happy? Are we happy and effective? Consultation with leading experts in the field makes it perfectly clear that we are all now programmed for perfect happiness, perfect happiness, perfect happiness, perfect happiness.
1138, we're tracked.
Are you all right? What did they do to you?
There are, of course, occasional technical or electronic errors in programming and or surveillance which produce perverse exceptions.
Had you seen this one before, James?
I saw it, I think, when Netflix was just becoming around. Oh, it wasn't Netflix. It was before Amazon Prime existed. There was like a love film
Oh, yeah.
like subscription service. And I think I saw it on there, you know. So whenever that was when I first saw it.
Love Film was what we had in this country when America had DVD Netflix.
Yeah.
Because those were two competing things before Netflix became a streaming service, weren't they?
Yeah, that's it. And I mean, again, this film has gone through all of those stages of like Laserdisc, DVD, VHS. It's gone through all of those different periods. And George Lucas has repeatedly revisited it like he does so much of his stuff. Like you said to me recently, you've been on a bit of a Star Wars kick. Obviously, Star Wars is what we know George Lucas for. This is sort of like one of his few other pieces of work. And I mean, the other one's American Graffiti, and then there's this. And this, again, it's constantly just coming back up again and again. It started off as a short film, didn't it? Like a student film that he made. It was called originally Electronic Labyrinth, THX 1138 4EB. So already I'm glad that they cut that down in the end, because that would have been too much. I mean, it's a weird title as it is, but yes.
I don't know. I think Electronic Labyrinth's a sick name. That's a good album name.
Yeah, it's a good album name, but I mean, yeah, it's a weird one, this. And so it started off as that student film, and then it got picked up later on when George Lucas was working with Francis Ford Coppola, like he was working for his production company or something. And then somehow, some way, he managed to get like a budget for it. And then, yeah, it came about that he was able to make sort of a big screen version of it. But Warner had no interest in it. Like they already didn't really know what they were doing in terms of like films for younger audiences. And that's kind of what they looked at with this. They were just like, yeah, we'll give this a go. But they were really unhappy with the edits and stuff. And they wanted to sort of like do different bits to it and sort of change certain things. But obviously George was sort of like, no, this is my film. This is how I want it to be. And again, this is probably why he's gone back to it so much and just changed things.
Yeah, I've recently rewatched all of the Star Wars movies, and I had never seen this before. And I have to say, I didn't have high hopes because I don't think he's a good director. I was really, really surprised how good it is. I was surprised that he had such a good film in him in his early days. You know, even the first Star Wars movie, I don't think it's amazing. Sorry, everyone. You know, I think the other Star Wars movies are better. The ones that he didn't direct.
I think that's just a fact, isn't it? Like the first Star Wars movie, sort of, it's influential in everything that it did.
I think people really do love that first one.
Oh, Empire Strikes Back is just better though, as a film.
Yeah, I think everyone's in agreement on that, but I think a lot of people think the first one's better than the third one, and I don't agree with that. But we're not. It doesn't matter.
We're not here to talk about that. Yeah.
But he is obsessed with returning to things, and he redid this in like 2004, which is weird timing because that's right in the middle of his prequel trilogy. You would have thought he'd be too busy to be doing this.
He's just going back in all his films, just adding CGI, isn't he?
I'm pretty sure that's the version I watched, the 2004 version, because it looked like it had some special effects that probably wouldn't have been in a 1971 film. I'm not sure.
Well, I think you can't get hold of the 70s version now.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, what do you think about that aspect of his career? Because that's very frustrating to me, the idea that you can't watch the original version of this, you can't watch the original version of the Star Wars films. Like, when I rewatch them, the re-edits from the 90s and the early 2000s are so ugly. They just shouldn't be there. And it's just, I don't care if a creator wants to do that with their work, but I just like to be able to see the original form, you know?
Yeah, no, because it made me think about like, because in the first Star Wars film, Jabba the Hutt's just a guy, and then they switch him up and things like that. But I mean, you don't necessarily need to go back. But with this one as well, I think the fact you can't get hold of the 70s version, as far as I'm aware, you might be able to get it somewhere, but at least it's not the sort of like the one which is easily accessible. I think I read somewhere that you can only get it on Laserdisc. And I mean, that really shows like how obscure this original cut is. But yeah, when you start like plonking in CGI and trying to make the film shinier, it doesn't always work. I mean, I think it's fine with this. Like THX isn't like, it's not known as a massive, massive genre film. Like, not everybody has seen it, but I think that's kind of like why it could get away with some of those extra bits, because you can go back and you don't know what it was like originally. But
I don't know, mate. I disagree. I think it's more egregious in this, because what I like most about this film is how small scale it is, and it's stuff that we talk about all the time, like lower budget, creative sci-fi, and then to have the kind of like cartoon monkeys at the end or whatever it was, like it looks incredibly weird in this film, and I don't like it in the Star Wars re-edits. But those are special effects movies. The problem in those is the kind of the very different style of special effect clashes.
Yeah.
But with THX, it's crowbarring special effects into a movie that's actually quite light on them.
Well, there's lots of stuff like I think the moments where you see the people in the underground, you see how many people there are. I think all of that's like a re-edit, reshoot. And they've got like extra bits with new extras in it and stuff like that, just to sort of like expand the world. The CGI bits, they age. They've already aged as it is. And by plonking them into a film from the 70s, you've got this weird disconnect. But I mean, George Lucas likes to do it. He likes to go back to his old stuff and try and shine it up a little bit. And that's what he's done here.
He's clearly a filmmaker that is trapped in his own nostalgia, and I expect that's why he's such good mates with Spielberg as well, because Spielberg is someone who obviously has made a lot of creative hay out of the concept of nostalgia, but it's nostalgia that kind of killed the Star Wars franchise for me with the sequels. Like nostalgia is the tumor at the heart of those sequels that brings the whole thing down, and but it's just weird that like that's actually being faithful to the films. to have so much nostalgia in it. And they're so, not to talk too much about Star Wars, but they're so nostalgic to 30s and 40s film serials, and you see that in the opening of THX with the clip from Buck Rogers. This nostalgia that Lucas has in his filmmaking that leads him maybe to revisit his films has been picked up by Disney, but it's just like the worst aspect of the Star Wars franchise to pick up and run with.
Because I think like the best thing about George Lucas is his world building and his sort of his ideas, definitely. And all of those kind of things. They're iconic, aren't they? Because you look at certain characters and you look at things in this. It's a very rich world that he's created. It's a dystopia that is quite sterile, but it's got lots of interesting bits of technology and stuff. And he's really created this like futuristic environment in like an eye-catching way. And I think all of that, again, feeds into this dystopian sort of like stuff that we're looking at. And the future technology he's depicted in this sort of, it's just really nice to watch.
Yeah, definitely. Looks incredible. He's a great ideas man. I also think he's acknowledged publicly, more recently, that he's not a very good writer of dialogue. I think he said that about the prequel films, which have awful dialogue. But it's just interesting that in this film it feels a bit like he's aware of that blind spot he has, because the dialogue in this is incredibly strange, but deliberately strange. All of the conversations are weird, and characters often seem like they're talking at cross purposes and not fully engaging in a real conversation with each other. But that's part of the world building, and it's part of the setting, and it's there to make you feel weird, and it's very deliberate. I remember when we used to make student films, and in our third year at uni we kind of had free reign, and I just absolutely hated any kind of dialogue, because I can't write dialogue at all, so I had basically just a zero dialogue film for mine. I just based everything on not having the character speak. So I can very much relate to this, especially because it's based on a student project. I like this idea. I don't know if I'm making it up, but I like this idea that Lucas is aware of his lacking skills in dialogue and deliberately circumventing that.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing about film. That's when it works in its best way, when it's like telling the story in a visual way rather than too much dialogue. And like you say, George Lucas may not be the best at writing dialogue, so it helps that this film doesn't have too much of that.
And for this series that we're doing, I found it incredibly refreshing as well, because we've been talking throughout this series about how so many of these dystopian films start with text on screen. Z.P.G didn't do it, but it did do an information dump at the start with the edict scene happening 8 years before the rest of the plot. There's this inclination in dystopian films to just dump some exposition on you at the very beginning, and THX doesn't do that. It's all world building and a slow trickle of not really information. It's more of a mood piece throughout, and you don't really learn a lot about anything. You have to infer it.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because this whole world is quite vague and abstract as to what is actually going on. You're not really told much about the government. There's certain bits you see in certain scenes, but all you really know at the start is sex is prohibited in this world. Showing emotions is treated as taboo. People are taking drugs regularly to sort of regulate their emotions and like make them more effective workers, from the sounds of it. And all of this stuff is working into making these people, like the environment, quite sterile and emotionless and just workers, because they don't seem to have much in the way of personal lives. And it just, everything seems to sort of revolve around their work life and being effective. And that feeds back into the religion. And there's certain things that they say in sort of, there's a scene where THX is having a confession. He's in a confession booth, and then he's talking to this, what do they call it? It's 000 or something like that. It's like their weird deity, which is just a picture of a man which looks a lot like sort of Christ. And he says, like, there's words that he says in that. He says, "You are a true believer, blessings of the state, blessings of the masses, work hard, increase production, prevent accidents, and be happy." And that's so important to everything that's feeding into these people's lives.
Yeah, the religion's really interesting, isn't it? Because it's vaguely Christian. It does look like a sort of Renaissance depiction of Christ, and they use some of the language, true believer, blessings, but it's blessings of the state, blessings of the masses. And I think he's also told, you are of the divine, made in the image of man, whereas Christian theology would be humans are made in the image of God. So God has kind of been destroyed, but this religion is borrowing familiar tropes of the prehistory's Christianity and still using that, but it's fed it all into this strange, I would say it's a capitalist society, but it's like capitalism where the individualism of capitalism has been removed, because so it's kind of capitalist and communist at the same time. Like they're all workers working together, but you also must buy, keep buying, keep producing, celebrate commerce, but also you have no individuality, blessings of the masses, go to work, ignore the accidents and contribute to production.
It's also like this industry thing which we've come across before as well, sort of like the industrialization of humanity so that they are working like machines. And the thing which grabbed me about that thing that OMM says, prevent accidents and be happy.
Yeah, and the accidents are catastrophic in THX's world, aren't they? There's hundreds of people dying in like massive radiation fires on the production lines. What struck me was that THX is told to increase production, prevent accidents, work hard, continue to do that and consume. But the thing that he actually does, his job is he's on the production line of building robots, and the only thing we see robots do is function as oppressors of the state. They're the police force. He's just building more robots to oppress him and others and enforce the dystopian society. We do see other roles, like other jobs exist in this universe, but that's what THX in particular does.
I have a hard time concentrating.
You are a true believer. Blessings of the state.
Please forgive me.
Blessings of the masses.
Thou art a subject of the divine, created in the image of man.
Let us be thankful we have an occupation to fill. Work hard. Increase production. Prevent accidents. And be happy.
Yeah, well, I mean, the other role we see is what LUH does. And she's basically like Big Brother. She's operating the cameras and seeing what people are doing. But she's not quite that, is she? She's more sort of, people are talking to their cameras, and then she comes up with the responses, the automated responses. Because there's a scene where someone's asking like about their dose or something in the mirror, and then she presses the right button with the correct response to give them. So she's kind of like a telecommunicator. It's like a futuristic version of that.
But she does also, I mean, it falls under a surveillance role, doesn't it? Because she works with Donald Pleasance's character, SEN, and he's much more explicitly on the sort of surveillance side of things, but it's falling under the same umbrella. We do also see other jobs, because later on we meet SRT, Don Pedro Colley's character, who is he's basically an actor. There's quite a big entertainment industry. There's like readily accessible pornography that you can watch holograms of and get like a machine to sort you out so you don't have sex.
That scene was just like, you don't fully realize what's happening until the machine starts doing its bit. It's like, Jesus.
Yeah, because the thing that he chooses to watch is just like a sort of exotic dance. It's very Star Warsy, isn't it? The hologram. But it's just kind of an exotic dance. It's not that explicit. And then we cut back to Robert Duvall and he's getting milked. I was quite surprised by that scene, actually, because...
Yeah, I wasn't expecting it from this film. I just think of, like, Star Wars and stuff, and it's all very sort of family-orientated.
Oh, okay.
And I'm just like George Lucas doing, like, a smutty bit in his original film.
Sure. No, I meant more like the whole clinical setup and the mood suppressant drugs and sex being a crime. I assumed we were going into a world that just had very limited sexuality and sexual desires. And then we get that scene and it's like, oh, okay, well, actually, clearly THX still wants and needs something, but he takes his mood stabilizers and it's taboo to have sex with a person.
They just have to regularly get their pipes cleared out.
Yeah. Yeah, but he's flicking through the channels and we see there's a whole media entertainment industry within this weird world, and SRT is one of the hologram actors. I was a bit uncomfortable by that because it felt a bit like a minstrel show, which I felt a little bit uncomfortable with, the kind of the comedians that we see. But in any case, we get reintroduced to the actor behind that, who is a really interesting character because he talks about himself as though he is a hologram.
Yeah.
You know, he has no identity outside of his job. And what does he say when he first meets them? He's like, I wanted to get out of the TV and go into the real world.
Yeah. And like when I was first hearing that, I was like, wait, is he a hologram? But then you sort of realise, no, it's just because he's a hologram actor.
But it's such a good example of the kind of dialogue that Lucas is writing, because he's speaking in this quite alien way. And yeah, that's the natural response, is that like, and it's a sci-fi movie and you don't really know what's going on through most of it. Like it's not outside the bounds of possibility that we might have a hologram character, but no, he's just he's a human being with a reduced sense of identity.
Hello. Where'd you guys come from? Oh, well, it doesn't make any difference, I guess. Is that food? I'm starving. Do you mind?
How did you get here?
I was lost.
You're not lost now.
Mm-mm.
Another way out?
Mm-hmm. That's the way out.
Well, that's the way we just came.
Yeah, but maybe you were traveling around in circles, because that's the way out.
How do you know?
Well, look. Look more closely, you see? Come on.
Oh, yeah.
Him and SEN and all the characters that they meet in this weird sort of prison moment I think the prison scene is really interesting as well, because it's just this white room where occasionally one of the robot policemen will come in and prod them a bit, but they're just kind of left in this sort of blank space. And they've all been put there because there's something which means that they're not one of these workers. There's some sort of imbalance. There's something which means that they're not as dehumanized as the rest. And because of that, they're all put together in this weird prison. But it's a prison they can quite easily get out of as well.
Yeah, exactly, which is what THX and SEN decide to do eventually. But yeah, I assume they were all continuing to receive some sort of medication. The medication is just like all over the place in this film. We see inside cabinets sometimes. It's such a cocktail of drugs that they are taking. You can only imagine what cocktail of effects that's going to have on people. So I kind of assumed those other guys who had no real interest in leaving that weird liminal space, they were either still drugged up or on such psychological effects of the drugs they were taking out in the real world that they are it just doesn't cross their mind, I guess.
And of course, the whole reason that THX finds himself in there is because LUH, his partner, stops giving him the correct drugs, and that kind of gives him that awakening moment, which is so similar to what we see in Equilibrium, like that moment where they stop taking the drugs and then they can see the real world a bit. Their emotions return slightly. Yeah,
and they have this passionate sex scene, which is that's the awakening for them, isn't it? Well, it's the awakening for THX. LUH has had her awakening off screen, I guess, because I think at the start of the movie she's already well off the drugs, isn't she? And she wants to feel this connection. There's similarities to Z.P.G, isn't there? That like they're dealing with this quite intense feeling and feeling like something's missing. So acting out against the rules and wanting to do something illegal, but to act on that biological urge that they have. And for LUH, it's just to feel a human connection and a human relationship.
And LUH says she's pregnant as well, doesn't she? Like when she sees THX later on. So again, you've got this kind of like, obviously sex leading to reproduction, and that sort of being in there as well amongst all this other stuff. But the children that you see in this film as well are sort of, they act like children, but they're all given the same uniformity. Like everyone in this dystopia is given a prefix, like a THX, SEN, and a number. And they're also like, they've got shaved heads, so they all look similar or the same. And they've got like white uniforms. Everything, again, is there to dehumanize them. So again, we've got this dehumanization. And that's sort of happening to the children as well, right from the very start. SEN has this amazing conversation with a couple of the kids when he's talking about his childhood. And you see the kids sort of reacting to it and they're having fun. And this is obviously before they're sort of like indoctrinated into this dystopian society.
Well, doesn't he literally help them like hook up the devices that will indoctrinate? Aren't they? They're having like lessons physically pumped into them like through their veins, so they're in the process of indoctrination. I thought that's like a weirdly cute scene, wasn't it? Because he's talking about it was the same process for him, but back in my day the tanks were massive. You know, you got your nice little slick things going into your arms. But yeah, they're in that process of indoctrination when we see them. But is he? I guess is he off his drugs then as well? And so that's why he's being a little bit. He's having a human connection with them. I don't know if you could go as far as to say it's fatherly, but that sort of emotional and nostalgic connection that he makes with the kids is not something that would really exist in this world, I think.
And I mean, his sort of like his awakening kind of happens when he's tuned in to THX and LUH having sex. He's watching them on the monitors, and then he's like, I want you to be my roommate to THX shortly afterwards. And then, he ends up like one thing leads to another, and then they end up in the prison. But I thought that was interesting, the fact that sort of stirred something in him rather than just the entertainment channels where he's watching like erotic dancers or whatever. And yeah, there's something in that.
Yeah, I thought he was a really interesting character, and it's a great performance, as usual, from Donald Pleasance, because he's set up to be the villain, isn't he, at the start of the movie?
Yeah, he's such a weird character, isn't he? Because yeah, he is sort of set up as the bad guy at the start, but he becomes more human as it goes on, and you kind of feel a bit sorry for him as well, because he's sort of he is just tagging along with THX, and it's like he's got no reason to do any of this. He could just be doing his job normally, but it's just he's just roped into it all.
He ends up having very little agency, doesn't he? You think he's going to be... I thought he was going to be very manipulative. He starts off quite manipulative. He's trying to get THX to move in with him and seems to be manipulating him and LUH to get that. But then, yeah, he just ends up just going along with everything but enjoying himself, it seems. He seems to be having a really fun time on their little prison escape, but he doesn't have much of his own agency. He's still a victim of the dystopia, I think, in that sense, isn't he? The great escape of this film is very much about THX and SRT and SEN tagging along. They're not really escaping anything, I don't think. They're just there for the ride.
Yeah, and I mean, the escape comes about sort of like towards the climax of the film, but the escape is just... I don't really know who they're escaping from, except for like a couple of robots as well.
Yeah.
Because you don't see much. There's all this talk about the government and sort of like who's in charge, but you don't really see any of that. All you see are the workers and sort of their lives, and then the people working at these entertainment channels and stuff like that, and then a few of the people, like the religious people. Like, all of it's very vague, like we said earlier on, but the only people enforcing it are these robots, these weird looking robots, which look kind of like the T100 or T1000. Which one's the liquid Terminator?
T1000.
T1000. I mean, there's so many different names now for them all. But yeah, they look like the T1000 in their little police uniforms. And yeah, what did you think about them as well, and sort of their exact purpose?
I think what the point that you're getting at is, yeah, that like there is no Big Brother. Even though Big Brother might not be real in 1984, there is at least a figurehead. You've got Ohm 0000, but conversations with that deity figure are robotic and vague at best. You know, that you get generic responses telling you to just don't worry about it, work hard, take some more drugs, contribute to the production line. There is no government. You make the robots enforce the law. The law is take your drugs and keep making robots. That seems to be the system that they've built in this mysterious underground city. But we don't know who built it.
Yeah, there's like no explanation. I think that's... Again, it's world building, but without the exposition, which I think is a refreshing thing to see in our Dystopia series, without a doubt. But yeah, you finally see this big sort of escape scene with these two robots or three. I forget how many are sort of tracking them down at the end. But the thing is, like, they escape from prison just by going through a random door as well.
Yeah,
like it's all just so weird. And again, you got so many people around. It
reminded me of video games like Portal and the Stanley Parable, you know, like where you go behind the scenes of the story. That's what, and I think those games were quite influenced by this film, because they are behind the scenes when they're in prison, but then getting out also involves just kind of like climbing over a fence that says don't go here, going to the edge of town, you know, climbing over the fence, and then you're in the kind of pipe works of it instead of the nice clean white liminal space that everything else seems to take place in.
Yeah, it is very sort of behind the scenesy, isn't it? And I mean, there at the escape, when one of the bits I really liked was where they all end up. They all end up in slightly different places, don't they?
Yeah.
I mean, it was really frustrating to see SRT get in the car and then just not being able to do anything.
Yeah.
And then
he
finally
immediately drives into like a pillar, doesn't he?
I know. Oh, it's painful because you kind of want him to get away. And I mean, THX speeds off in his car and he looks back and he's kind of like, where's my mate gone? And he doesn't try and turn back because he knows at that point there's nothing he can do.
He's also got no real connections to those guys. He has this. He's made this human connection with Luh, but it's been very brief, and he's trying to get to her. He's trying to help her. He's the only person he has any kind of real connection with, and it's clear that she's been killed. Possibly her fetus is alive, or it's just another fetus that's given her designation. He's got no connection to SRT and SEN. It's he's happy for them to come along, and if there's another car, SRT can use it. But yeah, he's not going to turn around. He's lost LUH, so he just wants to get the hell out of there if he can.
Yeah, and I think this is something which we haven't come across too much, but I think part of like being human is the feeling of community as well, and the fact that there's no real sense of community in this dystopia. Like THX, LUH, everyone's just living with partners, but not really living as partners. And there's no sort of like, they don't gather together in groups. I mean, in Z.P.G, you saw them, they had friends and stuff, and they like went to parties and things. But this hasn't got any of that. It's very much like everyone is a singular being, but they're working for the greater good, and the greater good is just mass production. So I think that definitely comes into it with that and sort of their relationships with each other.
Yeah, the breakdown of community is much more severe than in Z.P.G. I think what happens to society in Z.P.G. would be incredibly psychologically damaging for the people who really, really want to have children, of which there are many. But like you said, there would be some people in that society who don't want kids, and they would be able to handle it fine. But the impact on everyone's psychology in THX is so much greater, and you can see that from those cocktails of drugs. They take so many drugs all of the time. People, even in the chase scenes, there's like a control operator woman who's got the headset on. There's a couple of moments where she pops a pill in her mouth, like mid-sentence. She says something like, so-and-so can take no responsibility for the accident, and just pops a pill. Like, everyone's taking these mood stabilizers all the time. And that's because the changes to society and human nature, the need for community, they're so severe in this film that it has to be balanced out somehow. But it can't be balanced out for everyone, and these events in the film are inevitable.
And I think with that scene you're talking about as well, she's kind of felt like she's foregoing the feeling of guilt for that particular incident. So it's like, that's like an emotion, and it's something, so they're all just made to be emotionless all the time in order to get their jobs done to the best possible degree. And that makes them just as robotic as these police officers.
And again, not even just to do their jobs to the best possible degree, but in THX's case, to do his job without the very rational fear that there might be a huge radiation leak that sets fire to him and all his co-workers. He's working an incredibly dangerous job. You see footage on the screens of massive explosions just wiping out like a dozen workers, and that very nearly happens to him when he misses his drugs.
Yeah, and I mean, again, we don't see the flip side of this sort of these humans. The only sort of like other humans you see, what are they like? They're like monkey creatures, aren't they?
Yeah,
that's
no
what
idea.
They're supposed to be.
It's
like
very strange.
They're called like Wookiees or something. I don't know.
Oh yes, they are. They are. That must be what they are, because there was that line of dialogue where someone says they hit a Wookiee. I did catch that, but then I didn't make the connection when THX gets assaulted by them. I was literally just like, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah, and so they're supposed to be like Neanderthal men or something. Who knows? What
or
they
mutants? I think maybe.
Yeah.
I was thinking Planet of the Apes. So I wondered if they were mutants.
But again, you see so little of them. Also, like I've just got to say, I'm glad you're getting so many Planet of the Apes references in now. Since we've been watching them over on Patreon, you're constantly getting them in. I like it.
But that brings us to our great escape of THX, doesn't it? And it is very similar to Z.P.G. There's this great chase sequence, the weird attack from the Wookiees, and then THX emerges onto the surface. You don't even know it's an underground city, or you can probably tell from certain bits of the chase sequence, the roads they're on. But he climbs out onto the surface, and it's deliberately completely out of focus. It's just a just a silhouetted THX against a massive sunset. So we see nothing of the world. But I think, I don't know, like we've been watching a lot of dystopian films. I can read into an underground city quite a lot. The fact that the city is underground suggests quite a lot about what might be on the surface, especially if we've got like Wookiee mutants attacking you on the way to the surface.
It looks deserted, and you've just got the sunrise, and he doesn't really move, does he? He's kind of like...
No.
Because that credit sequence goes on for quite a while. You just see him sort of like looking around, and then I don't know if he's like freezes or not.
I don't think it was a freeze, because I think it's a sunset, not a sunrise, and I think you can actually see the sun going down as the credits are rolling. So I'm pretty sure Robert Duvall's just standing there, unless it's a special effect. But yeah, I think the character of THX is just standing there watching the sunset.
He's just like, I'm out and I can see this, but what do I do now? What do I do now?
And I think the tone is exactly the same as Z.P.G, which is, what do I do now? I don't have high hopes for him. We're possibly dealing with an irradiated surface. I don't know. I don't know the circumstances of why they've had to move underground. But regardless, he has no resources, no equipment. He's not well equipped. Unless society has just continued happily and normally on the surface, which doesn't feel likely, THX is screwed. But it's two fingers to the man. I'm not going to be part of the weird mixture of capitalism and communism with the Om deity. I'm out of here, guys.
Yeah. And again, it's because like THX doesn't fit the mold of that society anymore. He is something different by that point. He can't function there anymore. So there's only one thing that he can do: get the hell out of Dodge.
Yeah. But yeah, the alternative is that prison space, the open plan prison.
Which just looks just as boring. I mean, at least he's got like a sunset. He can enjoy that for a bit and then not get prodded by these police officers every 5 seconds.
Yeah, I was happy for him. Even though it seems like he's going to die, probably.
Okay, so THX 1138 and Z.P.G. What are we thinking sort of Great Escape-wise? I mean, they've both got big escapes towards the end, but there's so much more in there. They've got these like big dystopian worlds that they've built up. And again, we're seeing similar trends in sort of like controlling people's emotions and like sex coming into play as well, like being such a thing about being a human and being part of a society and things about community. There's so much in both of these films. They both offer something a little bit different from what we've seen so far.
Yeah, I think we've touched on the idea of a dystopia trying to suppress your biological urges, but I think it's made explicit in these films more than any other film we've looked at. Like the dystopian societies have. Well, in Z.P.G, they have a problem that they're trying to solve, and in THX, it's unclear if there was a problem or it's got to this situation by other means. But in any case, the dystopia is trying to suppress biological, natural feelings and urges, and it's the undoing. It's sort of the undoing of society. It's certainly the undoing of the protagonists. But we have some sort of happy endings. They manage to escape, which feels good on film.
Yeah, definitely. They've got that kind of bit of hope. Maybe they'll be, either way, they're better off than the place they were in.
So, James, let me ask you this. How would you feel if you went to bed tonight and tomorrow you just woke up and you were in the world of THX or Z.P.G?
I would not know what's going on. If I was in THX, I'd be like, right, give me all the drugs because it's the only way I'm going to be able to function in this bald-headed world.
Yeah, lovely. But maybe you'd have some laughs along the way, right? Well, that's what we're going to be looking at next week. We're trying to keep things light, guys.
Trying our hardest.
We looked at modern times. We looked at Charlie Chaplin and Jacques Tati at the start of the series, and we're going to have another little refresher and look at a couple of comedy movies just to keep things a little bit light. So the theme for next week is being a fish out of water in a dystopia, and what are the films that we're going to watch for that, James?
So we will be watching Sleeper from 1973 and one which you've been bigging up a lot. A few other people have mentioned this as well to us. A film called Idiocracy from 2006 as well.
Yeah, a nice modern cult classic, that one. That's going to be really fun. So yeah, hopefully we can get a few laughs in and then it's back to business as usual, guys. Back to everything getting really bleak and depressing.
Yes, but we're going to leave you in this bleak and depressing state for a little while longer than usual because we are having a short 2-week break because there's a very special occasion happening in Matt's life.
Yeah, I'm going to be away for a little while, guys, because your dear host is getting married. So I'm going to be taking 2 weeks off. We're going to be taking 2 weeks off to allow me to...
Because we're getting married. Me and Matt are getting married. No, Matt is getting married. There are wedding bells in the air.
Yeah, so we will be back soon. As James said, a little 2-week break. But if you miss us, if you cannot deal with a 2-week break here on the main feed, why not come over and join us on Patreon? If you're not already a patron, we have a huge back catalogue of stuff that you can listen to. And if you are a patron, services will continue. We have a continuity plan in place, folks. There will be no break over on Patreon. So yeah, head over there for all your Journey Through Sci-Fi needs in the meantime.
Yes, please do. And remember, you can always get in touch with us. We are all over social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Just look up @Through Sci-Fi or @Through Sci-Fi Pod and you'll be able to find us and have a chat.
And if you want to support the show but you don't want to join Patreon, that's absolutely fine, of course. You can support us by leaving us a nice review. So leave us 5 stars, please, and make sure you include some text in there. That really helps. So why don't you leave us a review and let us know how you would sneak a baby out of the city if it was punishable by death to have one.
Right, that's it from us. We'll see you next time.